Welcome back, everyone, to Soundwell Guitar. Today's topic is going to be about whether or not your guitar instructor is too hard on you or not pushing you enough. Why I thought this would be an interesting topic is I am a guitar instructor. If you don't know me personally, you might not have known that about me, or if you haven't been following my channel very long, I don't just run a YouTube channel. Actually am a guitar instructor. I've been doing it for 24 years. Love doing it. I also was privileged with having a really good instructor. In fact, one of the best I think I could have possibly had. The thing was is he was really, really hard on me, and I wanted to talk about that because I've carried that over into my own lessons program as well. Now, I'm not saying like he was a mean teacher or I'm a mean teacher. It's not that. Delivery is very important. But I mean, where the teacher isn't settling for mediocrity. The teacher doesn't just end the lesson every time just saying, oh, good enough or whatever. Like, what you want is a teacher that really cares. But anyway, in staying in harmony with the title, the topic here about is your instructor hard enough on you or being too hard? I want to talk about that because of a personal experience I had. And I'm just going to go way back into the 90s when I started taking lessons. I had already been playing guitar for 10 years. I started playing guitar in 1984. And I was playing like Van Halen and Iron Maiden and stuff like that. I did not play classical guitar. I didn't take any lessons. I begged my parents for lessons, but nonetheless, I think they thought it was a passing phase, me playing guitar. Well, clearly it wasn't anyway, so I spent 10 years being self-taught. And when being self-taught, I was merely doing the things that I wanted to do, and it was like Randy Rhoads and Eddie Van Halen, Iron Maiden, stuff like that, Black Sabbath. Anyway, I had a pretty good ear, but after 10 years of playing, I started to realize that I had missed a lot. Especially when I started getting into listening to classical guitar. I tried to play classical guitar, and it was pretty bad because it can be a very exacting style of music in terms of the technique, the finger picking, the angling of your hand, and the fact that generally speaking, when you're studying classical guitar, it will be a requirement that you know how to read music. Anyway, so I tried at first to teach myself, but realized I really needed an instructor for this. And so I wound up getting a recommendation from a friend. He said, you want to study with this guy? He's not just any guitar teacher. He teaches professionals. I'm like, okay, sounds like my guy. So I go on to my first lesson, and right off the bat, I'm intimidated. Not just because of the reputation that's already preceded him, but he just was really serious. Like, really took this seriously. And I came in, and I played something, I think if I remember right, it was just something that I wrote when I was like 16, 17 years old. And I'm going to do it pretty much, I'm going to try to do it the way that I did it. I probably had my wrist angled back like this, and I was going like, this really harsh tone coming out, and I didn't even realize how much better it could sound with just the right technique. So my technique was bad. That was the first thing that he said. I came in and I played this tune that I wrote. He's just like, you write that yourself? And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, okay. He's like, that's cute. He's like, well, your right hand is really weak. Like, oh, dang, this guy doesn't pull any punches. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. I don't really got the finger picking thing down. I never even used the annular finger. And I had seen pictures and stuff where I'd watch videos of Andrea Segovia, and I always saw that little arc in the wrist thing. Didn't know how they did that. I was always like this, and I was just getting this awful tone out of the guitar. I was always wrapping my thumb around the neck like this. You don't want to do that on a classical. There were all these bad habits that I had. There were all these rules I was breaking. Well, then we get further into the lesson, and actually I think it was my second lesson. He gave me some right hand studies to do. Maybe something like that. I didn't play him that fast then. But anyway, but the second lesson I come in, And he puts this piece of music up on the lecture. Now I've got the book that he wanted me to do. I just mentioned this one in my last video. But he put up on the podium, he went somewhere ahead. And I remember the tune. Found it. Okay. Yeah, it's on page 58. It's this waltz by Fernando Carulli. And it's all just the notation. Pretty piece. Anyway, he puts it on the stand, and he's like, all right, now play that. And I looked at it, and it's just the dots, the notation. It's not tab. And quite frankly, even at the time, I barely even knew how to read tab. I did everything by ear. And I looked at it, and I'm like, I read this stuff about as well as a kindergartner could read Shakespeare. And he's like, what? You can't read? Like, he just like seemed physically upset. And it was quite an extreme reaction. And he's like, oh my goodness. And he's like, grabs the book and he goes right to the first chapter and he's like, all right, and he puts check marks on everything in chapter 1. Now, let me give you an example what the first exercise sounded like. It goes like this. Okay, need I go on? You get the idea. It's real basic stuff, and I was like, oh man, I'm like, that's too simple for me. I mean, like, I've done simple stuff like this before or something like that. And he goes, yeah, we'll do it again. And that was the end of my lesson. And I walked out of there kind of going like, what is it? This guy's like just like this, iron fist. I was like, well, I know I'm not seeing him so that he can tell me how great I am. But I had mixed feelings about it. Because it was kind of scary. And but I went home and I practiced. I did. And I remember then talking to a friend of mine who was a cello instructor, and he was the one that he said those very words. He said, what, are you paying him to compliment your playing? And I'm like, you're right. I'm not. Now, don't get me wrong. Again, I cannot emphasize enough how privileged I was to study under this person. In fact, I've remained in contact with him all of these years, and I still consider him to be a mentor. And I took lessons from him for decades. We got into advanced jazz theory. I have him to thank mainly for me being the player that I am today. But this is how it started out. I didn't know him, and this delivery, this style of teaching really scared me. But now I had a really interesting experience about 2 or 3 months in. I'm still in this book, and it moves a little slow because he's making me learn how to read music. So I'm just kind of on to studies that are, let's see if I can even keep this thing open. That just go like, just single note stuff, teaching me to count properly, knowing where my notes are, using the proper technique. And like I said, I was months into it, and that was still the level that I was at. And anyway, I inspired a buddy, a fellow guitarist that made the same mistakes that I did. He'd been playing for about 10 years. He didn't know theory. He didn't know how to read music. He didn't know the names of his chords, any of that stuff. He's like, man, it's really cool. You're taking lessons. I think I should do that too. I should have done it a long time ago. You've inspired me. I'm going to find a teacher. And so he did. He gets a music teacher. And we meet up after he's doing lessons for a couple of weeks. Anyway, after I get together with him and we're going to compare notes, I'm thinking he's doing the same stuff as me. And I asked him, what is it your instructor's doing? He's like, what does your instructor have you doing? And he goes, oh, we're doing Bach. And I'm like, you're playing Bach already? Like, I want to play Bach. That's the whole reason why I got into this thing, is I wanted to play Bach. Like, how are you doing Bach already? He's like, oh, it's easy. Teacher's got me doing Bach. And I'm like, what song? And he said, Bury. Bury? Like, you mean beret? The beret in E minor? Oh, is that how you pronounce it? And like right off the bat, I'm just kind of like, he doesn't even know the name, how to pronounce it properly. That's the tune that goes. You know that one? Okay. I have it right here. I never actually studied this one. I was just sight reading it. But he proceeds to play it. And mind you, also, I'm like, you already know how to play beret? I'm like, I didn't know you know how to read music. He's like, I don't. He's got me doing it on tab. Now, I'm not here to dog reading tablature at all. I use tabs a lot for rock and metal and stuff like that. But like I said earlier in the video, when you're doing classical, if you're really serious about it, in order to really connect with the composers and the poetry and interpret what they were saying, you want to be speaking their language, and their language is the notation. So if you're really serious about classical guitar, I always highly recommend to learn to read the notes. So right away, to me, that was kind of sketchy. Like, he's teaching you classical, but you're not learning to read. But he seemed so satisfied with his instructor because he's got him doing fun stuff right away. And his instructor's so easygoing, and just letting him do what he wants. And, oh, it's so cool. Yeah, I'm playing beret. Like, you should ditch your instructor. He said, mine's better. Mine's already got me doing cool stuff. Your stuff's boring. I was like, well, I don't know. Something seemed fishy about this. I'm like, well, can you play the beret for me? He's like, oh yeah, sure. I'm gonna do my best to imitate him. I'm not making fun of him, but this is just what happened. He proceeds to grab his classical, rests his wrist right on the guitar like that. Any classical player knows not to do that. And he starts plucking the strings almost like a frog leaping up and down on the guitar. And he's going like, I won't do the whole piece like that, but you get the idea. It was like it was a mess. There was no technique. There was no phrasing. It sounded awful. And then I'm like, oh, okay, thinking he's still got some work to do on it. And I'm like, so how much longer do you think you're going to be on that? He's like, oh, my teacher passed me. He passed you? You played it like that, and he passed you. He passed him on it. I'm like, in that moment, I realized I had the exact instructor I needed to be with. I was right where I needed to be. I was so lucky to have the instructor that I had, that this guy was pushing me to do things right. And that if I wasn't doing things right, if my technique wasn't right, if my phrasing wasn't right, he was right there on top of me and telling me it's not right. So that's what I have to say about being with the right instructor. Now, of course, you want their delivery to be friendly and all that, and he wound up softening up later. I did wind up having a conversation with him and told him that he was a bit abrasive at times, and that it caused me to be nervous on my lessons. And he opened up and admitted, that he had been called on that before, and he was an intense guy, and actually I love him for that. But there was no question that I had found the right instructor. And why was he the right instructor? Because he cared whether or not I was playing right. So if you have an instructor that's pushing you to do things right, and you come in on your lesson and they're saying, no, you got to do this, and this could be better, and this could be better, they're not being a jerk. They're giving you your money's worth. Okay, I hope you found this helpful. I'll catch you on the next video.